In a Cleveland home, a young father kept reaching for the same ordinary drink, raspberry iced tea, the kind you buy by the half-gallon, the kind you pour without thinking. By the summer of 2006, Matthew Podolak was 31 years old. He worked with family. He had children. He made plans to go fishing with his daughter. Then his body began to fail. His kidneys, his heart, his strength. At the hospital, doctors asked whether he could have swallowed antifreeze or rubbing alcohol. The answer they were given was no. Years later, an Ohio appellate court would describe the state's theory in one plain sentence. Prosecutors alleged that Holly McFeeture began poisoning Matthew by putting antifreeze in his iced tea. This is not a story built on one dramatic moment. It is a story built from small observations, medical slides, testimony about a relationship that changed, and a legal fight over what a body can prove after death. This is The Bitter Cup, the antifreeze death of Matthew Podolak. Production note: this episode is based on public court records, primarily the Ohio Court of Appeals opinions in State v. McFeeture from 2014 and 2020. Where the record describes testimony, we say testimony. Where it describes the state's argument, we say the state argued. Where it describes the defense position, we say the defense argued. There are no invented interviews in this episode and no cloned real person voices. Source readings are dramatized court record readings, not archival recordings. The appellate record begins with a man who, according to trial testimony, did not look like a person moving toward death. Matthew Podolak was 31. The court described him as healthy and active. He worked at Phoenix Industrial Finishes, a company owned by his uncle. He had started there after high school and worked his way up. The record says his uncle was grooming him to one day take over the business. He liked boats, camping, hunting, softball, and hockey. These are ordinary details, but in a case like this, they matter. They show what the jury heard about the man before the illness took over the story. Matthew met Holly McFeeture in 2003. They began dating. They moved in together in Cleveland. Friends said Matthew was excited about settling down and starting a family. Within a year, their first child was born. A second child followed about 2 years later. A third child from Holly's earlier relationship was also part of the home. For a while, at least from the outside, this was the shape of a young family. But the court record says friends began to see something else. One close friend, Dennis Owen, testified that he was with Matthew on the night Matthew met Holly, and that he had what the opinion calls bad vibes about the relationship. Another friend, Russell Hersey, said that by 2005, the relationship had become argumentative, strained, and divisive. The court record does not ask us to turn those words into a scene we cannot verify. It gives us enough to hear the tension. Matthew, according to testimony, sometimes spent several nights at Hersey's house. Hersey advised him to end the relationship. Matthew would return. The same friend described Matthew's moods as swinging between very happy and crying upset, sometimes fearful. Hersey knew Matthew had become depressed, but he testified that he was not concerned Matthew was suicidal because Matthew was looking forward to raising the children. That sentence would become important because years later, the defense would argue that Matthew's death was suicide. In court records, motive is often built from documents that sound almost too ordinary: insurance, retirement accounts, beneficiary forms. Matthew had a 401k plan and life insurance through his job. The appellate opinion says Holly McFeeture was the beneficiary of both. Friends advised Matthew to remove her as beneficiary. That is a court record fact, not proof by itself. It sits beside other facts. A relationship friends called strained. A young father friends believed was not suicidal. A household in which Matthew's favorite drink was often present. By spring 2006, Matthew's health began to change. By Memorial Day weekend, Hersey was worried. Matthew had helped with a boat motor before. He had been strong. Now, according to the testimony summarized by the appellate court, he had gained weight, sweated profusely, complained of back pain, and said he had lost his strength. Hersey told him to see a doctor. On July 26, 2006, Matthew went to Dr. Thomas Mandat. He complained of flank pain, pain in the lower back. Dr. Mandat determined that Matthew had kidney stones and prescribed medication to help with the passing of the stones and the pain. 4 days later, Matthew was dead. The day before he died, Matthew spoke with his father by phone. The opinion says he had bought his daughter a fishing rod and wanted the three of them to go fishing together. His father said Matthew was excited about the outing. That detail is small, but in a courtroom, small details can become bridges between competing theories. The state would say Matthew was being poisoned over time. The defense would say the poisoning was acute, a one-time ingestion, consistent with suicide. The fishing rod did not answer the medical question, but it became one piece of what jurors heard about Matthew's state of mind. On the evening before Matthew died, he was at a get-together with friends, including Hersey and Owen. Hersey testified that Matthew appeared in grave physical condition. The court record says he had gained even more weight, was sweating profusely, had to steady himself to walk, and complained of extreme back pain. Again, friends advised him to remove Holly as the beneficiary on his 401k and life insurance. Later that evening, Holly called Matthew's father. She said something was wrong and that she had called 901. Matthew's father spoke briefly to his son and found him confused and distressed. Matthew was taken by ambulance to Palmer Community General Hospital. At the hospital, the doctors determined that his kidneys were failing. Dr. Mandat was part of the medical team in the emergency room. Doctors found metabolic acidosis, which meant Matthew's blood was very acidic. According to the appellate record, they were concerned about toxic ingestion of methanol or antifreeze. Holly was questioned at the hospital about whether Matthew had ingested antifreeze or rubbing alcohol. She said he had not. Matthew died the next day. A true crime story can sometimes move too quickly from death to accusation. This case did not. The record describes a long delay. The autopsy was performed the day after death. The first report came months later. The indictment came years later. For families, that kind of waiting is its own chapter. For courts, it becomes a question of proof. What did the body show? What did the witnesses show? And after 6 years, could the state still prove who was responsible beyond a reasonable doubt? Dr. Daniel Galita was the medical examiner who performed the autopsy. The appellate court says he had performed more than 3,500 autopsies. In January 2007, 6 months after Matthew's death, he issued the report. It was signed by him and then County Coroner Dr. Elizabeth Balraj. The report concluded that the cause of death was chronic intoxication by ethylene glycol. Ethylene glycol is a chemical found in antifreeze, but the manner of death was listed as undetermined. 3 years later, in 2010, the autopsy report was amended. The cause of death did not change. The manner of death did. The amended report, signed by then County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller, concluded that Matthew died as a result of chronic ethylene glycol intoxication and that the death was homicidal in nature. Neither Dr. Balraj nor Dr. Miller testified at trial. Dr. Galita did. His testimony was central to the state's case. According to the appellate opinion, Dr. Galita explained that ethylene glycol is absorbed into the blood and then metabolized in the liver. It transforms into oxalate, which combines with calcium to form calcium oxalate crystals. He found a massive amount of these crystals in Matthew's kidneys, blocking proper kidney function. He testified that the flank pain Matthew experienced beginning in May 2006 was due to the crystals. He also found evidence that the kidneys were attempting to heal. That mattered because healing suggests injury over time. Dr. Galita also found crystals in the heart and brain. He determined that Matthew had very severe acute myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle. He testified that Matthew would not have developed myocarditis from a single acute ingestion of ethylene glycol, and that the myocarditis needed at least 3 weeks to develop. The state's theory depended on that time frame. Not one drink, not one sudden act. Repeated exposure, a slow poisoning. The court record says Matthew's favorite beverage was raspberry iced tea. Friends testified he would bring it to work, either in a thermos or in its original half-gallon or whole-gallon container. Michael Mulhall testified that Holly would sometimes bring Matthew lunch at work, and it would always include either a half-gallon or whole-gallon container of iced tea. Prosecutors argued that this was the delivery system. The appellate court described the murder case as one built largely on circumstantial evidence. That phrase can sound weak in everyday speech, as if circumstantial means speculative. Courts use it differently. Circumstantial evidence can be enough. It is proof of facts from which other facts may be inferred. Here, the state pointed to medical evidence of chronic poisoning, testimony about the relationship, the beneficiary status, the iced tea, and opportunity. Police collected 2 bottles of antifreeze from the garage of Holly's home in August 2007, after she had moved out. The state introduced the bottles to show antifreeze had been in the home. But the appellate opinion records an important limitation. Sergeant Michael Quinn acknowledged that the particular ethylene glycol in those bottles did not match the ethylene glycol found in Matthew's body. A responsible telling of this case has to keep that limitation in the story. The bottles did not become a neat television clue. They were part of the state's picture, but not a chemical match. That is the difference between a documentary and a shortcut. The state also presented testimony about Holly McFeature's demeanor and statements after Matthew died. Courts treat demeanor evidence carefully. People grieve differently. The absence of visible emotion is not proof of murder, but the jury heard it and the appellate opinion records it. Rebecca Vega, a friend of Holly's, testified that she went with Holly to the funeral home to make arrangements and found it curious that Holly showed no emotion. Not anger, not a tear. Matthew's father testified that at the wake he had to ask Holly to come into the room where the casket was to receive visitors. Hersey described Holly as acting like it was a party and like nothing had happened. 2 weeks after Matthew's death, Vega went to Holly's house and saw what appeared to be cleaning solvents in the open in the kitchen. Vega asked about it because there were young children in the home. Holly, according to the testimony, said one item was antifreeze and that Matthew used it to winterize his boat. The court record notes that Matthew had not owned a boat since 2004. Another witness, Cleveland police officer Michael Jakima, knew Holly from before Matthew's death. According to the appellate opinion, after Matthew died, Holly told him that he did not have to worry about interrupting another man's house anymore. She then said, casually, that Matt died last week. She said Matthew had kidney problems and pain from hockey. About a month and a half after Matthew's death, Holly began a relationship with Charles Lipscomb, another Cleveland police officer. When the autopsy results were released in January 2007, the opinion says Holly became worried and offered different possibilities. Maybe Matthew had committed suicide. Maybe an angry co-worker poisoned him. Maybe he was exposed to something at work. She told Lipscomb she did not even know what antifreeze was. Another acquaintance said Holly told him Matthew died from an industrial accident. Again, these are testimony summaries from an appellate opinion. They are not independent recordings. They matter because they show what jurors heard as the state built its theory around shifting explanations. The most dramatic testimony came from Jameson Kennedy. Kennedy met Holly at the bar where she worked in late 2007. They began dating in spring 2008. The appellate court describes him as a convicted felon with a lengthy criminal record who abused alcohol and drugs. Those facts mattered because the defense attacked his credibility. According to Kennedy's testimony, one day in September 2008, he and Holly were drinking, and Holly became emotional about Matthew. She said she wanted it all to go away, wanted to move from Cleveland, and was sorry about what had happened. Kennedy asked what she was sorry for. He testified that she said she put something in Matthew's drinks, he got sick, and died. This is an allegation about what was said. It is not a recording. It came from a witness with serious credibility vulnerabilities. The defense emphasized that. Soon after, Kennedy's relationship with Holly soured. On November 8, 2008, he went to her home to confront her. She called police. When officers arrived, Kennedy assaulted them. He was arrested and charged. After his arrest, he told police about the alleged confession. He was later sentenced to 10 years in prison for assaulting the officers. The defense said this was not reliable. The state said it fit the medical evidence and the surrounding circumstances. The jury had to decide what weight to give it. A fair episode cannot leave the defense theory as an afterthought. The defense argued that Matthew died by suicide. It pointed to alleged stressors, losses in internet gambling, work not going well, and stress from dealing with an infant child. The defense called Dr. Robert Bucks, the coroner from El Paso County, Colorado. Dr. Bucks testified that Matthew suffered from acute poisoning. In plain terms, he believed the medical picture pointed toward a one-time ingestion of ethylene glycol, which would be more consistent with suicide. Dr. Bucks disagreed with Dr. Galita's finding of myocarditis. He testified that he believed Matthew had suffered a heart attack. He said a person can have myocarditis without ethylene glycol poisoning, and that flank pain should not be a symptom of ethylene glycol poisoning. He also testified that there is no relation between kidney stones and ethylene glycol poisoning. On the question of calcium oxalate crystals, he testified that the crystals found in Matthew's kidneys began forming in the hospital. On the cumulative effect of sublethal doses of ethylene glycol, Dr. Bucks said, according to the appellate opinion, "We don't know the answer." But he did not deny Dr. Galita's finding that there was evidence Matthew's kidneys had attempted to heal. That point gave the state a response. Healing suggested earlier injury. This was the core medical dispute. Chronic poisoning or acute ingestion. Homicide or suicide. A pattern over months or one final act. After trial, the jury found Holly McFeeture guilty of aggravated murder and contaminating a substance for human consumption. On appeal, she raised 7 assignments of error. She challenged the sufficiency of the evidence. She argued the convictions were against the manifest weight of the evidence. She raised confrontation and due process issues. She challenged other act evidence and hearsay. She argued the trial court erred in denying a new trial, in ruling on Dr. Galita's testimony, and in relation to pre-indictment delay. The appellate court rejected the assignments and affirmed. On sufficiency, the court wrote that the case was built largely on circumstantial evidence. It explained that circumstantial evidence and direct evidence can have equal probative value. Looking at the evidence in the light most favorable to the state, the court held that Dr. Galita's testimony about chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, coupled with testimony about the relationship and opportunity to contaminate what Matthew regularly consumed, was sufficient to support the conviction. When Holly attacked Kennedy's credibility, the court said, "Credibility is not a consideration in a sufficiency review." On manifest weight, the court considered whether the jury lost its way. It did not find that it had. The appellate court did not retry the case. It reviewed legal questions under standards of review. That distinction matters. Appeals do not usually ask whether a different jury could have believed a different expert. They ask whether the conviction can stand under law. In 2020, another appellate opinion addressed post-conviction relief. The syllabus says the trial court did not abuse its discretion in dismissing the petition without a hearing. The court found the appellant did not set forth credible operative facts to establish substantive grounds for relief where the state was not in possession of the documents at issue, and there was nothing to suggest that the state knowingly used false testimony to obtain a conviction. That later proceeding did not undo the conviction. The human question in this case is not only who poured what into a drink. It is also how slow harm can hide inside ordinary routines. A favorite beverage, lunch brought to work, back pain treated as kidney stones, a father buying a fishing rod the day before he died. For Matthew's family and friends, the court record preserves fragments of what they noticed. A man losing strength, a man sweating, a man looking forward to taking his daughter fishing, a man they did not believe wanted to die. For the defense, the same record preserves doubt. The delay in indictment, the initial undetermined manner of death, expert disagreement, the credibility problems around Kennedy, and the lack of a matching antifreeze bottle. The jury heard both. The appellate court affirmed the result. As listeners, we should resist the temptation to make the story cleaner than the record. The prosecution theory was not a single smoking gun. It was accumulation. Medical evidence said chronic ethylene glycol intoxication. Friends described a deteriorating relationship and deteriorating body. Documents showed Holly was beneficiary of insurance and retirement accounts. Witnesses described iced tea as a regular part of Matthew's day. A later boyfriend testified to an alleged confession. And the defense answered, suicide, acute poisoning, unreliable witness, alternative explanations. The legal system resolved that conflict with a conviction that survived appeal. But the reason this case lingers is the ordinariness of the alleged method. No dark alley, no abandoned house, no elaborate scene, just a home, a family, and something poisonous hidden inside what looked routine. Before the close, here is a slower source ledger walkthrough. This is included because this episode is public record based and because the difference between fact, court finding, allegation, and defense position matters. Fact ledger item 1. Tag, court finding. Matthew Podolak died at Palmer Community General Hospital in 2006. Dr. Daniel Galita performed the autopsy and found chronic intoxication by ethylene glycol, a chemical found in antifreeze. Source: State vs. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271.1. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Fact ledger item 2. Tag, court finding. Holly McFeeture, Podolak's live-in girlfriend at the time of his death, was indicted for murder 6 years later, in 2012. Source: State vs. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271.1. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Fact ledger item 3. Tag, prosecution state, alleged that 3 months before Podolak died, McFeeture began poisoning him by putting antifreeze in his iced tea. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271, Percy 1, 2935. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Fact ledger item 4. Tag, defense by suicide. The Diane Abler who testified the poisoning was acute and more indicative of a one-time ingestion. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271, Percy 1, 3639. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Fact Ledger Item 5. Tag Court Finding. Fact Ledger Item 5. Tag Court Finding. The jury found McFeeture guilty of aggravated murder and contaminating a substance for human consumption. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271, Percy 40. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Fact Ledger Item 6. Tag Court Finding. Chag Court Finding. Source: State v. McFeeture. Tag Court Finding. The Ohio Court of Appeals for the cited source says. Source: Fact Ledger Item 6. Tag Court Finding. The Ohio Court of Appeals for the cited source says. Source: Fact Ledger Item 6. Tag Court Finding. The Ohio Court of Appeals for the cited source says. Source: Fact Ledger Item 6. Tag Court Finding. The Ohio Court of Appeals for the cited source says. Source: Fact Ledger Item 6. Tag Court Finding. The Ohio Court of Appeals for the cited source says. Source: Fact Ledger Item 6. Tag Court Finding. Fact Ledger Item 6. Court Finding. The Ohio Courts of Court of Appeals affirmed the judgment in 2014. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271. Judgment. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Fact Ledger Item 7. Tag Fact. Podolak was described as a healthy, active, 31-year-old man, an outdoorsman, and an employee being groomed to take over Phoenix Industrial Finishes. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271, Percy 4. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says.
So, reader, Fact Ledger Item 8. Tag Fact. By 2005, Friends described the relationship as argumentative, strained, and divisive. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271, Para 7. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader, Fact Ledger Item 9. Tag Fact. McFeeture was the beneficiary of Podolak's 401k plan and life insurance through his employment. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271, Para 10. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader, Fact Ledger Item 10. Tag Courting. Podolak's health deteriorated in spring 2006. By Memorial Day weekend, he had gained weight, sweated profusely, complained of back pain, and said he had lost strength. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio 5271, Para 11. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader, Fact Ledger Item 11. Tag Court Finding. At hospital, doctors found that ledger explained the gall job. At hospital, doctors found that ledger explained the gall job. That item stated in the ledger whether he had ingested antifreeze or rubbing alcohol. She stated he had not. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio, 5271, para 16. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader: Fact ledger item 12, tag, court finding. The initial autopsy report listed the cause as chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, with manner undetermined. The 2010 amended report changed the manner to homicide. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio, 5271, para 28. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader: Fact ledger item 13, tag, court Faultwald. Not testified that calcium oxalate crystals were in Podolak's kidneys, heart, and brain. He opined the myocarditis needed at least 3 weeks to develop. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio, 5271, 30-33. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader: Fact ledger item 14, tag, fact. Friends testified Podolak's favorite beverage was raspberry iced tea, and McFeeture sometimes brought lunch, including a half or whole gallon container of iced tea. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio, 5271, 34. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader: Fact ledger item 15, tag, alleged. Jameson Kennedy testified that McFeeture told him she put something in Podolak's drinks. He got sick and died. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio, 5271, 25, 26, 46. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader: Fact ledger item 16, tag, defense spec Dishadin. The defense attacked Kennedy's credibility, including his criminal record and sentence after assaulting officers. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio, 5271, 24, 27, 46. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Source reader: Fact ledger item 17, tag, court Faultwald. Court ending. The appellate court held that circumvent that story is a lung in the court arrow. Source: Fact ledger item 17, tag, court folding. The appellate court held that circumstantial evidence, medical evidence, relationship evidence, opportunity evidence, and Kennedy's testimony were sufficient when viewed in favor of the state. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2014, Ohio, 5271, 43-47. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. So, reader: Fact ledger item 18, tag, court-fidding. In 2020, the appellate court affirmed dismissal of post-conviction relief without a hearing, finding no credible operative facts for relief on the asserted grounds. Source: State v. McFeeture, 2020, Ohio, 801, syllabus. That item stays in the ledger because it anchors the story to the court record. We do not extend it beyond what the cited source says. Matthew Podolak was 31 years old. The record remembers him as active, outdoorsy, proud of his family, and excited enough about a fishing trip to talk about it the day before he died. The court record also remembers the medical facts: ethylene glycol, calcium oxalate crystals, kidney failure, myocarditis, and a dispute over whether the poisoning was chronic or acute. True crime stories often end with a sentence, but a sentence is not the same as an ending. Matthew's children grew up with the absence. His family had to live through years of uncertainty, trial, appeal, and the public retelling of private pain. The responsible lesson is not fear of iced tea or fascination with poison. It is that the law often works with fragments: testimony, pathology, motive, opportunity, credibility, and standards of review. A jury has to decide whether those fragments become proof. An appellate court has to decide whether the law allows that decision to stand. In State v. McFeeture, it did. Please like and subscribe for more. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient.
A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. A note on pacing. In a poisoning case, the record can feel clinical, but clinical does not mean cold. The medical words are how the court tried to understand what happened inside Matthew Podolak's body. Ethylene glycol, metabolic acidosis, calcium oxalate crystals, myocarditis. These words are difficult, but they are not decoration. They are the mechanism of proof. The defense challenged the mechanism. The state relied on it. The jury accepted the state's version, and the appellate court held that the evidence was legally sufficient. Please like and subscribe for more.